Okay, hello everyone. We are going to get started right on time today. It is 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. My name is Mara Fleischman, and I am the CEO of the Chef Ann Foundation, who is the host of this webinar. The Chef Ann Foundation, in case you do not know about them, we are a national nonprofit that helps school food programs move from serving more processed food to serving more fresh, cooked from scratch meals. And this today is a really great topic about ultra processed food in schools. But before we get started, I do have some housekeeping things for everyone. So this is part of a three-part series webinar called Healthy School Food for Thought. And the third and last of the parts this year is on November 19th, and it's going to be about sustainable procurement in school food. This program will be recorded and we will be sending it out to folks who have registered for this webinar, so no need to stress on that. Uh, we encourage engagement with each other throughout the webinar and on questions. So we have both the Q&A and the chat open. Please use the chat to connect with each other. Feel free to share where you're joining from. If someone is, talking about something and you want to put a link in the chat about something that's happening in your state, please feel free. If you would like to submit questions, so we have about 12 minutes at the end of this to answer questions. And if you'd like to submit questions, please use the Q&A feature. You will be able to have questions directed to the whole panel or to specific panelists. Any questions that can be quickly answered or clarified by the Chef Ann Foundation team in real time will be in the Q&A. In addition, panelists will have the option to be able to answer your questions in the Q&A too if they have time. Any questions that don't get answered today in discussion, we will do our best to address in a post-webinar email, if you guys joined us for the food waste webinar, which was the first of this three-part series, you will remember getting a post-webinar email that captured a lot of the questions and answers. We have more than 1,000 people signed up for this webinar today, which is exciting. It seems like ultra-processed food is a topic people want to know about. So that's really great. So we're going to start to get into it. So the topic is ultra-processed foods, and really, I think we all can see that they are getting their time in the spotlight right now, especially in our country. It's exciting to see so much attention to this issue. We're really here today to kind of break down what ultra-processed foods are and what research tells us about them, how they show up in our school food, and how we can look to school food operations and policy to decrease the amount of ultra-processed food. This webinar is really a critical opportunity to talk about what's happening in the current conversation around ultra-processed food, and we have some incredible leading experts on our panel today, which I'm really excited about. So we are going to start with a professor, Christopher Gardner. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us today. And can you please introduce yourself? And could you help us just level set here? So the term ultra processed food has gotten a lot of play in the last 6 months, but we really need to know what are ultra processed food and how are they defined?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for this opportunity. Oh, what an honor to be with all these luminaries today. And I'm really excited about this audience that we have. I want to tell you, I want you to share my pain and suffering. I was on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee where we were tasked with answering 60 questions. One was ultra processed food, and we came up with one limited statement about ultra processed foods might lead in adults and kids to excess weight, but we need more evidence. And people were really mad that we didn't come up with a more detailed answer than that. But I also served on the American Heart Association, and we came up with a paper that just got published, and I'm actually going to put it in the chat right now. So on August 8th or something like that, we came out with a paper about ultra processed foods, and it was so detailed that we also got a lot of crap for having so much detail. And oh, now that you put it all on paper, then we have something to react to, and it's wrong. So you can't win. So what I decided to do is make a couple of quick slides to share with everybody so I can point out just what this idea is. And I think it's best to start with oats. So I think when we're thinking of ultra processed food, I actually like that David Kessler has tried to rename it ultra formulated. But ultra processed, technically, by Carlos Montero, who came up with the Nova score, is not about processing in terms of chemical or physical. So think about oat groats. I used to sort of condescendingly tell my father-in-law that I was great because I used steel cut oats. And he said, "Why are you doing that? Those are processed. Why aren't you having the groats? That's like the whole oat." Oh, now I buy groats. Okay. But either rolled oats overnight or steel cut oats are very minimally processed. You got to cook them overnight. But think about then that next level of physical chemical processing is the quick rolled oats that don't take very long, or oat flour. So that could be part of ultra processed, but it's not. None of those are ultra processed. So think about not the processing, but the ingredients and the formulation. So think of Cheerios for a minute. Okay, so Cheerios is made with oat flour, but it's not just oats. It's all these things. It's got 10 ingredients and it's got vitamins and minerals in it. But among breakfast cereals, Cheerios is pretty good. Now think about frosted Cheerios. Okay, well, this isn't anything new. That's really not ultra processed. It's just Cheerios with a crap ton of sugar in it. But that isn't anything new. We've been upset with sugar for a really long time, right? I think this is really manipulative. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but usually for Cheerios, it's 1 cup per serving. And somehow for frosted Cheerios, it's 3/4 of a cup. WTF. Come on. That's just so they don't have to say 16 grams of sugar in 1 cup, which would be so horrific. Nobody would buy it. I don't know. Okay, but now let's get into ultra processed. So this just gets into the obscene level of food pornography. Cookies and cream Cheerios with protein. Come on. Okay, so not only is this processed, it has ingredients, etc., but they added pea protein, which is actually one of the things that makes it ultra processed. But weren't the frosted Cheerios bad enough? So are we really worried about the physical chemical processing, or are we worried about the ingredients? And the idea that Carlos Montero had when he came up with this was the formulation. It was the ingredients. So let's just acknowledge that for a while. This has been around for a decade. This is when Nova came out. And there's 4 categories of Nova. And the first 3, he's not worried about. So group 1 is minimally processed. Group 2 is the culinary ingredients that you would use with group 1 to make group 3, which is processed, but peeling a banana is processed. There's lots of taking the nut out of a shell is processed at one level, right? But that's ridiculous. That's still a whole food. What he's really upset about is he thinks there's something different in level 4. These have a bunch of cosmetic additives in them. It's not so much the physical processing. So look what he's calling this. This is beyond conventional classification. He's really interested in the purpose of why they added the ingredients. And the purpose in his mind is they did it to addict you. So you'd eat the whole box or the whole sleeve of cookies, right? And so what he's most interested in this Nova classification, which I do agree is sort of above and beyond, it's these additives with cosmetic functions or food substances of rare or no culinary use, which basically means you don't have it in your home. Let's just pick one, high fructose corn syrup. How many of you have high fructose corn syrup at home? How many of you go to a restaurant that has high fructose corn syrup? How many of you have sugar at home? How many restaurants have sugar? You do know metabolically, high fructose corn syrup and table sugar are virtually identical. But one, no respecting home or restaurant would have high fructose corn syrup, but they would have sugar. I'm not sure that's important. Here are the categories of the cosmetic functions. Picture a salad dressing. If you went into the store to buy a salad dressing and it was all separated, somebody say, "Oh, I don't want that salad dressing." So would you eat the salad without salad dressing? Would you not buy the salad dressing because it was emulsified? Is that enough to not buy the salad dressing and not eat the salad? Ah, this is where it gets a little more confusing. And these rare or no culinary use things, Marion Nestle hates this phrase, but it's basically you won't find it in your kitchen or in a restaurant. It's oils, it's carbs, it's proteins that are isolated. So, and when we wrote our HA scientific advisory, we had to have a table that listed all these. And I'm going to show you a table with font so small you can't possibly read it, but I want to point out the headings of the columns of the table. One of the column headings is, well, these are cosmetic additives, but it's unclear if there's evidence of harm. And another one is evidence of possible harm. There actually isn't a category here of absolutely definitively there is harm from this thing. That column is missing. So I'm going to highlight the blue. So here's the colors, the emulsifiers, the bulking agents, gelling agents, flavors, thickeners, glazing agents, carbonating. Almost everything is in the category of we actually don't have direct evidence of harm. And there are 200 of these. And here's the food substance of no or culinary use. There's a lot of them. If you were a school and somebody said you need to remove all the ultra processed food, by what definition? Oh, by the Carlos Montera NOVA classification, you would have a lot of providers that you're sourcing from being ticked off that, well, we have to take this off because it has one of the ingredients. And they'd say, show me the evidence that this thing that I make with this one ingredient is harmful. Is there definitive evidence that all 200 of those have clear and established harm? There isn't. And so this is why it seems confusing out there. I actually think it's a really clever idea. It's like above and beyond. It's just obscene. If you look at some of the foods out there, they're clearly trying to manipulate us to eat them all. So it's not just salt, sugar, and saturated fat. It's more than that. But at the end of the day, almost all of the ultra processed foods are already high in sodium and added sugar and saturated fat. There's very few that aren't high in those things that have the colorants, flavorants, emulsifiers, etc. So I think it's an interesting concept. I think it's pretty easy to be an upset parent and go to your school and say, oh my God, I've heard about this. I need the school to get rid of all of them. But Chef Ann and the others here have been doing this for 20 years without this term ultra processed food. It's already been a priority and it's already a challenge enough. So I'm just not thinking that this is as helpful as some people might think it is. It's a really interesting concept. I don't think it should be ultra processed. It should be ultra formulated. But I hope that sets the sort of a standard of what it is that we're calling ultra processed and why so many people are being frustrated trying to figure out how to operationalize this in a school system. I hope that will help to set us up.
Thank you so much. I not only think that helps, we are so lucky to have you on this webinar. I know that I get a ton of questions about, ultra processed food, what makes an ultra processed food ultra processed. And I think hopefully you guys just got a little bit there. I'm sure I'm seeing questions come in asking for some pointing out some clarifications, but we are going to get more into that. And it's true, the Chef Hand Foundation is going on 16 years, and our mission was always to help reduce process. We called it processed food when we first started. We didn't call it ultra processed food. We call it processed food, reduce the amount of processed food served in schools and increase the amount of freshly prepared food. We're still in the game, guys. I think we're all still in the same game. I think the vocabulary is changing a little bit here. So next, I'm really excited to welcome our second panelist, Anna Lappé. We're so lucky to have her. Anna, can you briefly introduce yourself and talk about your experience and then can you tell us how you think we should be addressing UPFs in the role schools play in the change of serving ultra processed foods in schools?
Sure, thanks, Mara. And Like Christopher, just really, really delighted to be here. It was fun to see all of your notes and chat about where you're all zooming in from. So as Mara said, my name is Anna Lappé. I'm currently the executive director of an organization called the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. We work with philanthropic foundations and other partners all around the world, very much trying to bring more fresh, healthy food into the world and support the food producers who, of course, we rely on to bring us that food. But I feel like most importantly for this conversation, I am a mother of two kids who go to the Berkeley, California public school system. And so, I feel very connected to this conversation personally as well. And thinking about being here, and I was just thinking about how I think it was 25 years ago, maybe, that I first met you. And I don't know if you remember this, but Anne was working at a school on the East Coast. And I remember sitting down in that cafeteria, surrounded by boisterous middle schoolers, I think, and eating the most delicious, from scratch, healthy whole food meal of salad and just incredibly vibrant ingredients, and thinking about how far a cry that was from the middle school I went to, where lunch was soggy French fries and a chocolate chip cookie that you would get that would be as big as your hand, and you'd put it in the microwave to get it real warm. That was lunch. And thinking, wow, what it would be like to have gone to school in a school like that. So just really excited to be part of this conversation. So in a couple minutes, just wanted to share some thoughts with all of you about why schools are such an important site for organizing around from scratch cooking and healthy foods. And looking at the chat, sort of getting a sense of who you all are. I think this is all work that you're deeply connected to and motivated to work on. So you probably are very familiar with these statistics. Why do schools matter in this fight? They matter because in this country, so many of the children in this country get significant amounts of their food and their daily calories from school food. So, as probably many of you know, I think last figures was about 30 million children get breakfast or lunch every day through the school breakfast program and national school lunch program. About half, as I said, about half of daily calories come from schools for our children. So they are incredibly important places where children are getting nourished, and they're either getting nourished or they're getting food that does not support their health, including their mental health. I think many of you who work in schools know there is this direct connection between showing up ready to learn when you are well nourished and the mental health that brings, and the impact of both the physical and mental health of not having that food in your life. But of course, schools are more than just this vital place for feeding our children. Of course, they are places of learning. There are places where children will learn lifelong lessons about what is healthy food. What does exposure, to all kinds of foods they might not be getting at home. I'm sure many of you who work in schools, and I'm sure the Chef Anne Foundation have so many stories. I know I've heard it talking to kids who've gone to schools with great food feeding programs, where they talk about it was only in school that they tasted their first grape, or it was only in school where they discovered what kale was. And that they're bringing that back to their families. They're saying, hey, why can't we have this at home? So it's learning both what healthy habits can be and also bringing that back to their communities and their families. So what do schools need to be able to bring this really critical from scratch cooking to children? Of course, they need so much. This is what many of you are fighting for. Of course, you need more resources. You need resources for better food ingredients. And you need resources for, of course, the facilities. Some of you may have been involved in the study from 2020 from the Center for Cities and Schools in California, that in California alone, they estimated that it would cost the state $5.8 billion to make every single California public school from scratch ready, to get those kitchen facilities into those schools. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but At the same time, when you read that report, you see how all kinds of economic benefits that you get from making those kinds of investments. Of course, we also need training, which I know the Chef Ann Foundation is really critically involved in. And how can we think about working with our labor union partners to develop apprenticeship programs to support the kind of training that we need to help folks in schools be able to be such strong ambassadors for healthy foods for, again, the critical role that schools play. So just a couple of thoughts to add to the conversation. Again, really, really so happy to be here and look forward to continuing to learn from what comes next in the conversation.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was great. I actually did not know your kids went to Berkeley Unified. I should have known that. What a perfect segue into our next panelist, frankly. And just want to reiterate, it is so amazing to see people from across this country. There's so many amazing in the chat, and so amazing to see how many school food professionals are in this chat. You guys are the ones making this happen on the ground in the schools. And I love that we get so much connection from school food operators that are lifelong learners. They just want to learn, they want more information. And I love that you're here. So thank you, Anna, for all of that. And our next guest usually needs very little introduction, but I'm going to ask her to introduce herself. Chef Ann Cooper, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe the connection to Berkeley, and what you see as the biggest challenge in eliminating ultra-processed foods in schools? And really, how does the Chef Ann Foundation work with schools to kind of systematically work to help them remove ultra-processed food?
Great, thanks, Mara. Well, I'm not going to introduce myself, but I'm Ann, Chef Ann Foundation. We don't have time for me to talk about me, so let's talk about fixing school food. I happen to be on the ground in Ohio right now and working with a team in a large school district. And we take a very systemic approach that's different. There's lots of organizations and lots of people working in school food, but our approach is systemic. We look at food, finance, facilities, human resources, and marketing. Food, how are we going to get it? How are we going to make sure it's good? Where's it going to come from? And then once we know where the food's going to come from, we need to figure out how to pay for it. As Anna said, there's not enough money in school food for sure, but if we want to change it, we have to understand the finances of it. And this has been something that's been very difficult for a long time for people to understand how little money there is and what it would really cost to do something better. Facilities. Most schools really don't have kitchens anymore. I was in the school districts I was in, a lot of them were working without kitchens, totally, just with hot boxes. And, that's pretty hard to go from ultra processed or even just processed to scratch cooking if all you've got is a hot box. Makes cooking hard. Human resources. We've got decades of people working in school food with the only tools, box cutters and can crushers, because they open boxes and open cans. And so to take all of our teams all across the country and train them to be able to cook from scratch, to know what it is, to all the talent and technique. And finally, we have to market it. I mean, if kids have grown up with high fat, high salt, high sugar food, and that's what they're used to, and maybe their parents are used to that, and then we present them with salad bars and say, now we want you to eat all fresh fruits and vegetables, right? It's not that easy. So what the Chef Ann Foundation does is we actually work with schools all over the country in every single state, like 16,000 schools, 4.5 million kids. I mean, but what we do is work with the school food professionals to support them from wherever they are on the scratch cooking continuum, or if they're serving all processed foods, then what's a baby step they can take, to get to, maybe from heat and serve to scratch cooking, or then from traditional scratch cooking to fresh scratch cooking, and then maybe onto fresh speed scratch, and then maybe onto scratch. So we really take a systems approach and help school districts from wherever they are to take the steps they need to move away from heat and serve processed food to scratch cooked food.
Thanks, Anne. That was an iconic introduction. I will say people reference that in the chat. That is Chef Anne to a T, and I really appreciate it. This work is really comprehensive. A lot of people, kind of ask, how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we work with districts? Well, we certainly don't do it alone. There are people from nonprofits across the country on this webinar right now that we partner with in many different states, along with the school food professionals. But I mean, the big picture here is just that to get that ultra processed food meal on that tray and out in the cafeteria, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that needs support. And it's not just culinary training or, procurement. It's everything. It's equipment, procurement, reimbursement rate, policy. And that kind of brings us to our next guest, who I'm really excited, our next panelist, who I'm really excited to introduce. Our next panelist is MJ Kepner. MJ is the Senior Director of Policy at the Chef Anne Foundation. We are so lucky to have him on our team. And MJ has been doing a lot of work in a very small team of two across the country to support and uplift different ultra processed food legislation. So, MJ, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's going on with policy in our country right now as it relates to ultra processed food?
Sure. Thanks, Mara. And maybe someday I'll get to the point where I'm Ann Cooper and don't need to introduce myself. But for now, happy to introduce myself to the folks on the call. So like Mara said, MJ, I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Chef Anne Foundation. And my role really is to advocate for both federal and state policy pathways that support all of the school food professionals and what they're doing in increasing scratch cooking in schools. But way before my time here at Chef Anne, I was actually a free lunch kid who relied on school meals to get through my day. So really have a true deep appreciation for every school food professional on this call working to keep kids fed, because wouldn't be here with all of you. So just wanted to start with that. So like Mara mentioned, there's really been a flurry of activity at the federal and state level related to reducing ultra processed foods in schools since the turn of this year. At the federal level, we've actually already seen 2 bills introduced in the House related to ultra processed food in schools. And then there's been 2 separate reports out of the Make America Healthy Again Commission from the administration outlining their plans to reduce access to ultra processed foods across the food system. So these reports include policy ideas like a government-wide definition of ultra-processed food. As Christopher mentioned, this gets pretty complex fast, but the government is working to standardize it. And I saw someone actually mention this in the chat, but one of the other policy ideas out there is actually to close what's called the GRAS loophole, the generally recognized as safe loophole, that has to date allowed industry to self-regulate what substances they're adding into the food supply. So these are all part of a menu of ideas to reduce ultra-processed foods. And this issue, as Mara mentioned at the top, is really getting its much needed time in the spotlight. Now, if you look at the state level, there have been over 130 bills introduced that aim to regulate UPFs and also improve nutrition in schools. And these efforts have taken a couple different forms. There have been statewide bans on specific ingredients, restrictions on dyes and additives, and even warning labels on products containing colorings linked to negative health effects. Now, as food system advocates, I think we understand the gravity of this issue being at the forefront of the national dialogue. We know that leaders like former First Lady Michelle Obama and Congressman Jim McGovern, who have really made healthy food a cornerstone of their portfolio and their work, those folks are few and far between. So for the current administration to say this is going to be a priority is a really big deal. Now, the flip side to that is because school food has not really been a central theme of many policymakers' portfolios, there's a big education curve talking about what it takes to operate a school meal program and educating lawmakers about the complexities involved with increasing scratch cooking and reducing UPFs in schools. Now, the reason we have an ultra-processed food in schools problem in this country is because we have historically undervalued and undervested in school food professionals and the critical role they play in kids' health and success. And I'm going to repeat that because I find this to be really important and impactful. We have a UPF problem in our schools in this country because we have historically undervalued and underinvested in school food professionals and the critical role they play in children's health and success. So while all of these pieces of legislation and policy ideas represent really important progress towards kids' health and pushing industry, banning specific ingredients is not going to be enough in the long term to increase schools' ability to scratch cook and locally sourced meals. After all, a flaming hot Cheeto without red dye 40 is still a Cheeto, right, guys? So if our leaders are serious about improving school food, let's invest in kitchen infrastructure. Let's invest in staff training. Let's build that pipeline of professionals who know how to scratch cook. Let's increase the federal meal reimbursement rate that has not kept up with the cost of food and labor. And let's make sure every kid in this country has access to a free breakfast and lunch at school. I think this is a fact many people don't know, but school food in the United States, a $23.5 billion industry. So we all collectively need to start treating it as the health intervention and economic engine that it truly is. And that's how we're going to make change in this country.
Wow. Well, MJ, you definitely are on your way. You can look at the chat. People appreciate your comments and thoughts here. And it's true. You know, we find that school food professionals are the focus that we need to kind of hone in on in order to change school food in the long run, right? Ensuring that they have the funding, the value, and the empowerment to actually change school food, which is what we all want. So thank you. I'm so lucky to get to work with so many amazing people. MJ is just one of them. You guys are seeing Ashley in the chat, of course, Anne. But I will tell you, it is probably my most favorite part of my job is the people I get to work with. So we're going to do a little round robin here with some of our panelists. We really want to kind of dig into like what can be done about ultra processed food and what is the research showing. We're going to start with Professor Christopher because I mean, you know, if you guys haven't seen not just some of his research, but some of his programming, he has a lot of experience and has a lot of work and is incredibly passionate about this. But Christopher, can you tell us what are the impacts of, a whole foods diet versus an ultra processed foods diet?
Yeah. So think about how hard that is to design first to start off. So Kevin Hall did one of the best studies of these. He had very ultra processed and very minimally processed. And in just 2 weeks, he saw 20 people gain weight, eat more calories, negative metabolic effects. We do lots of studies. We had one of vegans versus omnivores, which actually was a healthy omnivorous diet and an even healthier vegan diet. And in just 4 weeks and in 8 weeks, lots of metabolic things happen: blood pressure, lipids, weight, inflammatory markers, microbiome, telomere length. These things can actually change really quickly. And so it's not like we need more evidence to show how important this is. It's there. It happens quickly metabolically. It really is just doing the studies that communicate the messages accurately. And I feel pretty sorry for the public. Let's just take ultra processed food as an example. I don't know how many of you saw just a month ago a paper about ultra processed food versus less processed food. And even though Kevin Hall had shown that ultra processed food led to weight gain, this new study with ultra processed food led to weight loss. And their LDL cholesterol went down more with the ultra processed group than it did on the minimally processed group. And I'm sure the headlines sort of got that wrong. They said, oh, weight loss is doubled with minimally processed, but they didn't get into some of the other things. And for those of you who saw that and were confused, let me just help a little. It was a study out of the UK, and all the ultra processed foods had to meet the UK guidelines for a healthy diet. They very intentionally picked the healthiest possible ultra processed foods, which is not what most people are going to do. They're just going to pick the normal crap. They're not going to go out of their way to eat well. And so the ultra processed food group actually lowered their red meat more than the minimally processed. They increase their fiber more than the minimally processed. So sorry for headlines that mess you up here. We really don't need any more studies to show that this whole food diet is very powerful. Depending on what you match and what you don't match in the scientific literature, sometimes it's overly matched, and it's enough to confuse you, and the headlines and the clickbait and the social influencers. So can we just start, if you got the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee and you got 20 scientists in one room, and you said, here's the literature, here's all the literature, not the cherry-picked studies, it is massively powerful to shift to a whole food diet in terms of appetite, weight, metabolic factors. We don't have to prove it anymore. We just have to we just have to figure out how to source those foods and get people to make that behavior change and make it a lasting behavior change, not undermined by parents at home, not undermined by a really toxic food environment. We don't need any more evidence. It is really powerful. How about that?
How about that? Kat seems to agree from Tahoe Truckee. So I love that. It's it's funny because we've been doing this work for so long, right? And research now is starting, as Christopher is saying, we're starting to look at research, but honestly, you hold up a box of chicken nuggets that's got 33 ingredients in it, and you look at the majority of those ingredients, or you look at a recipe for a homemade chicken strip in school food, and it's got 6 ingredients in it, and you can think to yourself, I really don't need the majority of those ingredients in the chicken nugget. And that's just, part of it is common sense. Uh, Anna, let's go to you. So I know you have worked a lot in kind of good food purchasing. So can you tell us, what is good food purchasing and procurement, and why does it have an impact, and kind of why does it matter? Because I think people have heard this term before, but if you could shed some light, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to. And I think this really picks up nicely from what MJ was sharing and what you heard from Christopher. So we know that we have a problem, that our schools are not serving the food they should. And yet we know, MJ, I think you said, $23.5 billion is being spent on this food. And so let's all remember that number is so massive, but let's remember what is behind it. You and me, these are our public dollars being directed to school food. So for many decades now, many folks, including folks at Chef Ann, have really been organizing around pushing on this idea of these are public dollars being spent on food. Why don't they reflect our shared values? And what would it look like instead of having a procurement policy that requires that districts just choose the cheapest food, no matter what it is? You could have a policy that says we should actually be looking at purchasing through the lens of shared values. So in 2012, folks started organizing around this idea in Los Angeles and with the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, and developed what is now known as the Good Food Purchasing Program. And in 2012, the school board approved it. And what it does is it enables districts and counties, city governments to make procurement decisions based on a shared set of values. So you've been hearing us talk a lot about health, but as a systems person, I care not just about my kids' health, I care about our community, I care about the workers, I care about animal welfare. So the 5 core values reflected in this program is, yes, absolutely, health and nutrition. It's environmental sustainability, local economies, valued workforce, and animal welfare. And what I love about putting all these values together is it unites people across all of these different kind of entry points of values and says they're all important. We're not pitting health against workers. We're not pitting one against the other. So in 2012, the Los Angeles Food Policy Council passed this program, and underlying it is principles of equity, accountability, and transparency. And over the many years since, I'll drop into the chat if I can, all the other districts and city governments that have passed this policy. I saw somebody in the chat was asking about Santa Barbara. Not yet, but this is where I think what's so exciting to me about the Good Food Purchasing Program is it gives local folks a tool to organize around. And again, it does so in a really like holistic systems way. Like one of my favorite events I ever did was an event with the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, and I was the moderator, and I had a representative from the Teamsters Union, somebody from an animal rights organization, somebody from the county public health department, somebody from environmental activist group, and the CEO of a local company that had been tapped in for better food because of this program. And to hear them all speaking about the power of this program was really motivating. So the Good Food Purchasing Program to me is just one of these kinds of local policies we can all engage in that can really help to unlock resources for the kind of school food that we need to bring more of the healthy food into schools that we all want.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I know someone, it looks like Lindsay in the chat, is asking about what the Good Food Purchasing Program is. So maybe we can put a link to it in the chat, which would be great. They are another organization that also kind of runs that. It's a partner organization, and that, I was talking on the last block about how there are so many people doing good work all over this country, and the Good Food Purchasing Group is really doing amazing work too. Thank you for that, Anna. It is this whole idea is that this is a system, like that school food, that meal you see on the tray is part of this bigger system that affects so many pieces to this puzzle that we all care about. And the procurement piece is really important. It's where you can affect a lot of change, especially with the dollars that we're seeing being spent on school food in this country. Next up, I want to ask Anne, where are some of the biggest challenges we're seeing in schools in moving away from ultra-processed food? And what are you seeing, and what have you done kind of more specifically to, you and the Chef Anne Foundation done to help districts move away from ultra-processed food?
Well, before I answer that, I want to talk about something else. I know that surprises you, right? So to kind of pick up on what Anna was saying is that school food, all that money that we spend, schools in America are the second largest restaurant chain in the whole country, 7 times more cafeterias than McDonald's. So we have tremendous power to make change, but it's hard. And I just want to acknowledge all the school food professionals that are out there, that this is not easy. It's not like there's Tinkerbell, bing, it's all going to get better. It takes a tremendous amount of work. And being on the ground in a school district right now, I can tell you that this is a large school district, and we saw kitchens with no equipment. We saw staff, we saw the school district being way understaffed, and people aren't really being paid professionally, and there's no time for training. And so it's all of those pieces, and some school districts might have the ability to really get good food. And in the Q&A right now, there's a question about using the USDA commodity foods or USDA foods. How can you better utilize them? Because there's just not enough money in the system. So what we at the Chef Anne Foundation really do is work with school districts through education, through training, through general support and assessments to be able to help them see where they are, have a baseline, and then within the food finance facilities, human resources, and marketing, where can they take steps? And I think that that's where we can be really helpful. We know that there's not enough money. Yes, the government needs to that there needs to be more money, but the government just cut $660 million. So I don't think more money is just going to come flowing at us. So how can we be more efficient? How can we be more effective? How can we do better procurement? And we have a lot of procurement tools we can help with. What about training? And we have training programs, healthy school food pathways, and fellowship programs. We have a tremendous amount of potential marketing programs. But what we really try and do is figure out, okay, we help districts figure out where they are and take one step at a time. If everything is ultra processed, then can we make it a little cleaner? Can we help put salad bars in? They're such a great entree point for school districts. It's such a great way to start. So let's get salad bars in schools, and let's help school districts procure some of those salad bar ingredients locally and regionally, and maybe even regeneratively. And I think that that's what's really important, is we have to respect school food professionals for how hard the work is. And there's also this whole component about where school food lies within the bigger infrastructure. I mean, school food is such a small part of the whole school district, and a lot of times it's forgotten. And school food directors often report to the transportation director or the facilities director or, the finance director. I mean, they're not seen as an integral part of the educational experience, which they are. I mean, we cannot educate students unless they're well fed. Malnourished kids can't think, and hungry kids can't learn. And so we have to be seen, all of us in school food have to be seen as an integral part of children's academic, physical, social, emotional health. And when we are seen that way, and when our department is seen that way, then we can truly start to make a difference. And I think those are the kind of things that the Chef Ann Foundation and the team, I mean, it's not me, I just mostly cause trouble, but what the team does is this work out in the field to help school districts.
Founder and chief troublemaker is kind of the title we like to give you. No, but and it's correct. And it's true, there's a whole, when you have about $4.30 on a reimbursable meal, you have to make choices. Ann's correct. We definitely need a higher reimbursement rate. But, one of the things that we love doing is working with districts to help them with recipe and menu modeling linked to financial modeling. And how can you make better choices? How can you decide, when you can use, a local poultry on certain menu items, and what are some of these most important decisions? And I think that's where the creativity in this role is too. And one of the reasons why we focus so much on apprenticeship and fellowship and kind of helping to kind of build this next generation of school food professionals that really understand what the opportunity is in front of them to create change. So what's the opportunity for you guys to create change? That's kind of also the question at hand here, because we've gone through a lot of this. We're going to get to questions, but before we do, I wanted MJ to help us understand what we can all do here. MJ is helps us out with advocacy, and tell us about what people can do, MJ.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot happening in the world. It seems like every day we're all drinking from the fire hose. And I think particularly as Christopher kind of outlined within the world of UPFs, it's kind of dizzying to figure out where to start, right? So first, for my school food professionals and advocates out there, show up and make your voice heard. These bills that I mentioned earlier, they're not going away. They're actually probably going to ramp up as state legislatures come back into session towards the beginning of next year. Invite your legislator to come see your program in action. Talk about the progress you've made. Talk about the progress you've made since they probably were last in a cafeteria and what they were eating for school lunch. Share with them the challenges you're facing, whether it's with procurement or staffing or training. Every politician, no matter who you are, loves a photo op. They love a photo op with a smiling kid in a cafeteria. So use that time to educate them about the complexities of this work and what you need from them to further increase scratch cooking within your program. If your state, many out there are working on an ultra processed food bill, go and share either written or submit oral testimony on behalf of the bill. One of the things we've been working on here at Chef Ann is making sure that operators' voices are heard as these bills are progressing through legislatures. The food industry, they're showing up at state capitals, in some cases testifying against these bills, in other cases asking for specific carve-outs for ingredients within these bills. So it's important that you as operators talk about how these bills are going to affect your program, what you're already doing to serve healthy meals, and really hold your legislators' feet to the fire to make sure that these bills that come out come with additional resources to support your ability to scratch cook in your school. Now, for the parents out there, I know there's a lot of parents registered for this webinar. Find out what's on your student's menu at school. Do they have a salad bar? Are there items coming from local farms? If you get a chance to chat with your food service director, ask them what they're excited about on the menu this year. Talk about what challenges they might be facing to serve more scratch cooked meals. Look up your district's wellness policy. Every district in the country is required to have one. Does the policy as written support healthy school food, or can it be improved? Is it even being followed and adhered to? Work to find like-minded groups and parents who can become advocates for your school food program and your director. Maybe that's your district leadership, your PTA, your school board. Be wind at their backs to help support these changes, because as Anne will tell you, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get changes. And if you can have that support and that advocacy, it's really going to help you. And if you can come at it, and this is really important, you can come at it from a place of empathy for school food professionals and how hard this work is, it's going to get your work that much farther and your advocacy that much farther. I'm going to end. I wouldn't be an advocate if I didn't leave you with a specific call to action. Reach out to your local legislators, your federal legislators, ask them to support more scratch cooking in schools. If you want specific bills to support and supporting evidence, look up Chef Anne's policy roadmap. It's all linked in there. You can also track what's happening in your state through the School Nutrition Association's bill tracker on their website. They have a great one. And if you ever have a question about where to start, how to get involved with advocacy, no matter where you live, my door is always open. Please send me an email. I'm always happy to help. This movement, as you've heard today, is growing louder by the day, and we need each and every person on this call to make sure we get a healthy scratch cooked meal to be a reality for every kid in this country. So thank you.
Whoop, whoop. That was awesome. And it's true. And MJ loves to help uplift school food operator voices in your state. So please take him up on it. Reach out to him. He will help in that effort. So we only have about 7 minutes left, and we got a ton of questions. So and we have some rapid fire ones for our panelists. So I'm going to start with Anne. Anne. So, a question from the audience. How can districts strategically use USDA food entitlement dollars to shift towards higher quality, less processed items when many values-based foods are only available through commercial channels?
Yeah, I just answered this in the written Q&A, but I will say it out loud. First of all, if you can do brown box and then scratch cook with it, that's a great option. So for instance, maybe you can buy BRT, bone rolled and tied turkey breasts, whole turkeys that are bone rolled and tied, and you might be able to braise them and make pulled turkey meat and do a pulled turkey sandwich, something like that. That's a great way to utilize dollars to buy animal protein. Another thing that we often recommend, and this might be state by state, is putting your money into DoD, because in a lot of places you can get local food through DoD. And also, if you can do a lot of your produce through DoD, that will leave you all that money on the table to perhaps buy better and healthier animal protein with your food dollars. But scratch cooking is the key, so buy brown box.
Thanks, Anne. This next question is for Christopher, and it is, how many of these studies reviewed in the evidence of harm, quote unquote, are actually free of conflict of interest? Is it impossible to have a clear and established harm for each of so many ingredients that the food industry has the power to introduce all of these ingredients without even tested grass loop, quote, in parentheses, grass loophole?
Yeah, so it's definitely not possible to test all those. Is the conflict of interest a problem? Not always, because the NIH has never funded all this at the level it should. So it's either not going to get done or it's going to get funded by industry. It's really up to the investigator to avoid the conflict of bias, but flip that to the grass. So actually, David Kessler, the past FDA commissioner who nailed the tobacco companies for addictive nicotine years ago, has just submitted a citizen's petition to the FDA. And it has to do with closing the GRAS loophole. And that the main point that he makes in there is for all the GRAS ingredients, by the way, when they started generally recognized as safe in 1958, there were 800 ingredients the food companies were using, and now there's 10,000 GRAS ingredients. And the concept there was the FDA didn't have the staff to address them all. And so it was really the onus was on the manufacturers to say, is it reasonable to say that these are generally recognized as safe? And David Kessler has put forward the position that it is no longer reasonable to say that. You can't think that these are generally recognized as safe. You're not going to get definitive evidence to prove that they cause harm. But we really have to take a crack at this generally recognized as safe because they aren't anymore. So part of it is just turning the script on that will be much more effective than one by one going through these ingredients and thinking of the conflict of interest and showing definitive harm. That would be my response.
That's good. And there are other questions for you. So I mean, I'm thinking this is you, but anyone can jump in. But one of the questions is, what about bioengineered food ingredients that they say that doesn't even sound like something we should be putting in our bodies? What about bioengineered foods? Do you have any thoughts there?
I do have a quickie, but I'll let somebody. Anne, you want to go? Go ahead, Anna.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to jump in to say that if you look at what are the most common genetically engineered foods commercialized in the United States, not necessarily available, but commercialized in the US, they're really seeds that have been engineered to do one of two things or a combination of both. Either they express an insecticide or they are resistant to an herbicide or a weed killer. And they're mostly commodity crops, corn, soy, etc., that are then either being used in animal feed or they are going into these ultra processed foods that we've all been talking about. So I don't see them as a separate issue. It's all one and connected. And to me, it raises, another question I've seen a few comments on in the chat, which is about, what are the production practices used to grow the food that then we're putting in schools, and the importance of making sure that we are trying to phase out and move away from the use of toxic pesticides. That's a category that includes weed killers, but also fungicides, rodenticides, all these other chemicals that are designed to cause harm either to insects or rodents or weeds, that there's very, very strong evidence actually causes harm to us people, and including exposure, especially from workers in the fields or communities living next to agricultural fields. For those who might be interested, I'm putting a link in the chat to one of the best in-class studies on the impact of agricultural chemicals on workers exposed in the fields, the children born of those workers, the children living in those communities. And so I just want to bring that in. I saw some people commenting on it, that when we talk about caring about children and wanting to serve them healthy food, we want to make sure that the folks who are producing that food are also healthy, and the communities in which those foods are produced are also healthy. And that brings us directly into a conversation about trying to phase out some of the most toxic chemicals that continue to be allowed on agricultural fields in the US. So that's how I get to that question, because it's really a question about inputs and how important that is. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. And I think I saw do you still have any comment on that? You'd have about 30 seconds. No?
No,
Okay.
but can I comment on something else that somebody asked?
Please do.
Okay, so this question I think goes to a lot of the challenges out there in the field. And the question is, how does anyone buy local food without killing their budgets? The question goes on, but that's a crux. How do we buy local, buy food with the least pesticides and herbicides possible? And the question really comes from scratch cooking, because scratch cooking by and large is less expensive than buying processed foods, but two, menu mix. So you might want to, just as a point of reference, you might want to serve this great, wonderful burger, because most schools serve burgers. So you want to serve a burger, but you want it to be, a really healthy burger, grass finished, whatever. So put it on the menu twice a month. Don't put it on the menu every day or once a week. And then alternatively, on that same week, do a beautiful pasta dish. And you can be buying that burger meat local and maybe even the burger buns. And then you put a really lovely pasta dish on the menu that costs almost nothing. So menu mix and scratch cooking can help you.
Thank you, Anne. And so we are at time, and I'm really glad you answered that question because it was a great lead into my exit on this. So, first of all, I want to really thank our panelists, Anne, Anna, Christopher, and MJ. Thank you all so much for being here. This conversation, I don't know about anyone else, but there's a lot going on in our world right now. And to have this kind of conversation within community that really wants to create change is incredibly inspiring for me. And I think from the chat, incredibly inspiring for a lot of people. We are going to be sending out follow-ups. We'll send this recorded session out. We'll also send out a follow-up document with answers to some of the questions we couldn't get to. And to Anne's last kind of comment on a question, please join us on November 19th for our third webinar in the three-part series of Healthy School Food for Thought, which will be about sustainable procurement. There's a lot of conflicting information about whether school food programs can truly procure higher quality ingredients, and this webinar is going to really dig into that. So thank you all, and to all the school food operators on this call, thank you all. I know you're going back into your kitchens right now, and to your teams, and thank you for all you do.